My ruthless mother-in-law didn't like me from the first day. She criticized me due to infertility. When I was pregnant and ready to celebrate the baby shower in the backyard, she came up to me and said, "You're showing a fake pregnancy." Then she pushed me into the pond at the back of her house. I fell into the cold water and lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, I decided to seek revenge, and within a few days, she was behind bars. I never imagined that a spilled latte would change my life forever. My name is Emma, and I'm a 32-year-old graphic designer living in sunny Los Angeles. Life has been a mix of colors and designs for me, filled with deadlines and coffee breaks. Little did I know that one ordinary day at my favorite coffee shop would lead me to meet David, the love of my life. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, and I was rushing to grab my usual latte before heading to my home office. The shop was bustling with energy as people chatted and baristas worked swiftly. I was lost in my thoughts, contemplating the project I had due that week. In my haste, I bumped into someone. As I turned, I felt a warm splash across my front. "Oh no!" I gasped, looking down at the mess. My latte had landed squarely on a man's laptop. I looked up, fully expecting to see annoyance etched on his face. Instead, I was met with laughter. "Wow, that's one way to make a first impression," he said, his smile warm and genuine. He was David, a 34-year-old software developer with tousled brown hair and a playful twinkle in his eye. "I'm so sorry," I blurted out, panic rising in my chest. "Let me help you with that." I grabbed a handful of napkins from the counter, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. "It's okay, really," David replied, waving his hand dismissively. "I could use a good story for my friends." He wiped the laptop screen, still chuckling. I could feel myself relaxing a little. "Emma," I said, extending my hand as he introduced himself. We shared a laugh, and in that moment, the air between us shifted. Something about his easygoing nature was comforting. After the initial chaos, we ended up chatting for a while. David told me about his job developing software and how he loved problem-solving. I share my passion for graphic design and how I enjoyed the flexibility of working from home. As we spoke, I felt a connection forming, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "Can I buy you a new latte?" he offered, glancing at the counter. "I think I owe you for the one I just ruined." "Only if you let me buy you one in return," I replied, a playful smile on my face. He laughed, and it felt as though we were the only two people in the busy cafe. From that day on, we became inseparable. We explored the city together, visiting art galleries and trying new restaurants. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, covering everything from favorite movies to childhood memories. David's easy charm drew me in, and I found myself falling for him more with each passing day. For years passed, and life with David was everything I had hoped for. He encouraged me to pursue my dreams and pushed me to grow in my career. Our relationship felt solid, like a well-constructed design. One sunny afternoon, as we strolled through a local park, David stopped and turned to me, a serious look in his eyes. "Emma," he said, taking my hands in his, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" The world around us melted away as joy flooded my heart. "Yes. Yes, of course," I exclaimed, feeling the weight of happiness wash over me. Our wedding was a beautiful affair, held under a majestic oak tree in the park where we often spent time together. Friends and family gathered to celebrate our love. Pastor Michael officiated the ceremony, his voice carrying the warmth of our commitment as we exchanged vows. "Do you, Emma, take David to be your lawfully wedded husband?" he asked, and I beamed, nodding enthusiastically. "I do." "And do you, David, take Emma to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he replied, a grin spreading across his face. As we exchanged rings, I felt a rush of emotion. It felt as if we were sealing a bond that would carry us through anything life threw our way. After the wedding, we bought a charming house in a quiet suburb of Los Angeles. It had a lovely backyard pond, which I was initially excited about. However, I had a secret, one that I had buried deep. As a child, I had a near-drowning experience that left me with a fear of water. I decided to avoid the pond as much as possible. David was understanding, always supportive. "We can fill it in, or do something else with it if you want," he said, his eyes full of kindness. I appreciated his willingness to compromise, but I still felt guilty about avoiding the pond. As we settled into married life, the challenges began. David's mother, Mrs. Peterson, a 58-year-old retired schoolteacher, was a formidable presence. From the moment I met her, I sensed an unspoken tension. During our first visit to her home, she made several passive-aggressive comments about my work-from-home job, implying it wasn't a real career. "Emma, dear, how do you manage to stay productive?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "It must be so distracting working from home." I felt a lump in my throat but forced a smile. "I actually love it. It allows me to balance work and life, which is important to me." Mrs. Peterson merely hummed, flipping through a magazine as if my words didn't matter. I glanced at David, who gave me a reassuring nod, but I could feel the walls closing in around me. Despite her cold attitude, David and I tried to focus on our relationship. We planned our future together, talking about dreams and aspirations, and I felt a glimmer of hope. But Mrs. Peterson's disapproval loomed over us like a dark cloud, casting doubt on our happiness. I often found myself questioning my worth in David's eyes. Was I enough? Would his mother ever accept me? As the weeks passed, the tension grew. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a turbulent journey that would test our love and commitment in ways we never expected. I took a deep breath, hoping that we could navigate the storm ahead together. After all, I had already faced challenges before, and I was determined to face whatever came next. The days following our wedding were filled with love and laughter, but as we settled into our new home, the reality of family dynamics began to creep in. Mrs. Peterson, David's mother, became a regular fixture in our lives, often dropping by unannounced. Each visit brought with it a wave of tension, her disapproving comments layered with subtle criticisms. One Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard the familiar sound of her voice coming from the living room. "David, dear, I just don't understand why you two chose such a large house," she said, her tone slightly condescending. I could feel my stomach knotting up. David tried to explain. "Mom, we wanted a space to grow into. We love the neighborhood, and it's perfect for us." "Perfect for you," she echoed, her voice sharp. "What if you can't keep up with the mortgage? You know, Emma's job isn't exactly stable, working from home and all." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. David shot me a sympathetic look, and I could tell he felt torn. It hurt that his mother could dismiss my career so casually, as if my hard work meant nothing. "Mom, Emma is an incredible designer," he said firmly. "She's been successful at her job, and I believe in her." "Of course you do," she said, with a hint of sarcasm. "But I worry about you, David. You need someone who can contribute more, someone who has a real career." I felt my heart sink as Mrs. Peterson's words sank in. My self-esteem took another hit, and I couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. But David's support was unwavering, even if his mother's presence was increasingly suffocating. As the weeks turned into months, I tried to focus on my work and our life together. I poured my energy into my design projects, hoping to prove my worth. David and I had settled into a comfortable routine, spending weekends hiking, cooking together, and enjoying our little home. But each time Mrs. Peterson visited, I felt that comfort slip away. One evening, after another tense dinner with her, I turned to David as we cleaned up. "Why does she have to be so critical all the time?" I asked, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I know it's hard, Emma," he replied gently, wiping the counter. "But she's just set in her ways. I'll talk to her again, I promise." I appreciated his reassurance, but deep down, I felt like I was battling a losing war. It was becoming increasingly clear that Mrs. Peterson saw me as an outsider, and every encounter left me feeling more isolated. Things took a darker turn when I overheard a conversation that left me shaken. I was in my home office one afternoon, working on a tight deadline, when I heard David's voice raised in anger. Curiosity got the best of me, and I quietly stepped out of my office to listen. "Mom, that's completely unacceptable," David shouted. I held my breath, straining to hear. I'm just looking out for you. Mrs. Peterson snapped back. I can't help it if I want what's best for my son. Emma's not good enough for you. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I backed away slowly, my heart racing. I felt betrayed and hurt. How could she say that? How could she judge me without even trying to understand who I was? Days passed, and I felt like I was living in a constant state of anxiety. I noticed a man watching me on several occasions when I left the house. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. But when it happened again at the grocery store, my heart raced. I glanced over my shoulder and caught his gaze, sending chills down my spine. Emma, you look tense, David said one evening, noticing my unease. What's going on? It's nothing, I lied, forcing a smile. But I knew deep down that I couldn't keep pretending. The pressure from Mrs. Peterson and the strange man watching me were beginning to take a toll. One night, after another awkward dinner with her, I broke down. David, I can't do this anymore. Your mother is relentless, and I feel like I'm constantly under attack. He pulled me into his arms, his warmth a temporary relief. I'll handle it. I promised to set boundaries with her. But as reassuring as his words were, I knew that wouldn't be easy. Mrs. Peterson was a formidable force, and her disapproval loomed large. As the stress piled on, David and I decided to take a vacation to a cabin in the mountains. We need a break, just the two of us, he insisted. Let's leave all of this behind for a few days. Reluctantly, I agreed. I needed the escape, even if I felt a nagging sense of dread about leaving everything behind. We packed our bags, hoping that time away would help us reconnect and rejuvenate. Little did I know that this break would change everything. Our getaway to the cabin in the mountains was just what David and I needed. Nestled among the towering pines, the air felt fresh and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere we had left behind in Los Angeles. As we arrived, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the weight of Mrs. Peterson's judgment pressing down on me. Look at this view, David exclaimed as we stepped onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. I smiled, feeling my heart swell with gratitude. This was our time to recharge. We spent our days hiking, exploring the nearby trails, and cooking meals together in the cozy kitchen. Each moment felt precious, and I could feel our bond strengthening. This is perfect, I said one night as we sat by the fireplace, the warmth wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. I needed this more than I realized. Me too, David replied, taking my hand. Let's promise to keep this feeling with us, even when we go back. But as the days passed, a familiar sense of unease began to creep back in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, especially after the strange incidents with the man watching me. I brushed it aside, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. On our last night at the cabin, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. David, I whispered, turning toward him. Yeah, he replied, his voice soft and sleepy. Do you think I'll ever fit in with your family? I asked, my heart racing. The question had been gnawing at me since our wedding. Of course you will, he said, his tone reassuring. My mom just needs time to come around. She can be tough, but you have to remember she loves me. Eventually, she'll see how happy you make me. I hope you're right, I murmured, turning over to face the wall, the shadows dancing in the dim light. The next morning, we packed our bags and headed back to Los Angeles, a sense of foreboding settling in my stomach. Once home, the reality of our life together came rushing back. I tried to focus on work, pouring my energy into my design projects, but the thought of Mrs. Peterson loomed large. I felt tense and anxious, and it showed in my work. A few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I found out a few days ago, I said, holding the test in my hand. My voice trembled with a mix of excitement and fear. His eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious? Emma, this is incredible. He swept me into his arms, spinning me around. We're going to be parents. As we celebrated, I felt a surge of joy but also concern about how Mrs. Peterson would react. Should we tell your mom? I asked hesitantly. Let's wait a bit, David suggested, still glowing with excitement. I want to make sure we're ready for her reaction. As the weeks rolled by, the pregnancy progressed, and so did the anxiety surrounding it. I was careful to avoid the pond in our backyard, fearing it would trigger my childhood memories of near drowning. One afternoon, while working on a design project, I caught a glimpse of the man I had seen before. He was standing across the street, just staring. Panic set in. My heart raced, and I hurried to close the curtains, my mind racing. Why was he watching me? Emma, you look tense, David said one evening, noticing my unease. What's going on? It's nothing, I lied, forcing a smile. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The pressure from Mrs. Peterson and the strange man watching me were beginning to take a toll. Finally, after weeks of tension, we decided to hold a small gathering to share our news. It was a modest celebration with friends and family, but my heart raced at the thought of Mrs. Peterson's reaction. When she arrived, her expression was unreadable. So, I hear you have some news, she asked, her tone sharp. Actually, yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. David and I are expecting a baby. Silence hung in the air as she processed the information. How wonderful, she finally said, her words tinged with skepticism. I hope you're prepared for the challenges ahead. As the evening wore on, she grew increasingly critical, questioning my choices and undermining my confidence. The climax occurred when she accused me of faking my pregnancy, her voice loud enough to draw attention. You don't look pregnant enough for someone in their third trimester, she sneered. Before I could react, she pushed me, and I stumbled backward, falling toward the pond. Panic surged through me as I fell into the cold water, my childhood fears crashing back. The world faded as I struggled to surface, gasping for air. The cold water enveloped me, and instinct kicked in as I fought to stay afloat. I struggled against the panic that threatened to consume me, the darkness closing in around me. Just as my lungs burned and my vision blurred, strong hands grasped my arms and pulled me up to the surface. Emma, hold on. David's voice broke through the chaos as he yanked me out of the pond. Coughing and sputtering, I gasped for air, the shock of the cold water jolting my senses back to reality. I looked up at David, his face a mix of worry and anger. Why would she do that? He shouted, his eyes searching mine for answers. I couldn't even process the question. All I felt was a wave of relief at being safe, and yet a deep well of fear from the confrontation. David, I choked, still reeling from the shock of it all. I had nearly drowned because of Mrs. Peterson's rage. Let's get you inside, he said, his tone softer now. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and led me back to the house, away from the stares of our guests. Inside, I collapsed onto the couch, my heart racing. Emma, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault, David said, kneeling beside me, his hands gripping my shoulders. I should have never let her come. I should have protected you. No, David. It's not your fault, I replied, my voice shaky. Your mother, she's impossible. She's always undermined me, and I thought it was just me being sensitive. I never thought it would come to this. David's face hardened with determination. I'll talk to her. This can't keep happening. You deserve to feel safe. Please, just be careful, I warned. She's not going to listen. She'll just see me as the enemy. That night, after our guests left and the adrenaline faded, David and I faced the reality of what had happened. I had been taken to the hospital for a checkup, and thankfully, both the baby and I were okay, but the emotional scars from that night lingered. In the days that followed, I struggled to find my footing again. The image of Mrs. Peterson's face twisted with anger replayed in my mind. How had it come to this? I spent hours working in my office, but the once comforting space felt suffocating. Finally, David confronted his mother. Mom, we need to talk, he said, his voice firm. I could hear the tension in his tone from the other room. About what? Mrs. Peterson replied, her voice cool and dismissive. About Emma. You crossed a line, and it can't happen again, David said, his frustration boiling over. Crossed a line? All I did was express my concern for you, she shot back. Concern? You nearly hurt her and our baby, he yelled, the anger spilling over. The conversation escalated, and I could hear the shouting from where I sat, tears streaming down my face. Finally, David stormed back into the room, his expression a mix of anger and defeat. "She won't change, Emma. She thinks she knows what's best for me," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can't let her hurt you or our family." In the following weeks, things began to shift. With David's support, I took control of my life and my mental health. We decided to file a restraining order against Mrs. Peterson. I knew it was necessary, not just for my safety, but also for the sake of our daughter. When our baby girl finally arrived, she was a miracle. The joy of holding her in my arms overshadowed the fear of the past. David and I named her Lily, a symbol of new beginnings and hope. As we looked at our little family, I realized that I had the strength to face whatever came next. I had learned to set boundaries, to stand firm in my beliefs, and most importantly, to protect my family. Life would continue to present challenges, but with David by my side, I knew we could overcome anything. We had emerged stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace the future together, leaving the shadows of the past behind.